Hello guys, here Mr. Merlos greeting you all again. Welcome to this special session that I have prepared in order to make a feedback of the most important content that we're going to be studying in the evaluation of the midterm number one. Obviously, as I told you in the video conference last time, we're going to be dealing with the topics had to do first with the definition of linguistics and the different branches that linguistics has. So today I'm going to review with you the most important concepts of linguistics and also the basic concept of all of the branches of linguistics, particularly the general branches. Also, we're going to make a very quickly review of the history of the English language. That was the content that we checked for the last 2 weeks, the week number 4 and the week number 5. Let's begin with the concept of linguistics. For example, Nijoy Ahmed before, right, answered to the question, and he said, linguistics is the scientific study of language or of particular languages. You know, every human language is seen to be a complex of knowledge and abilities enabling speakers of the language to communicate with each other, to express ideas, hypotheses, emotions, desires, and all of the other concrete and abstract things that need to be expressed. And linguistics study this knowledge system in all of their facets. That's one of the very clear and greatest definitions of linguistics. Also, we can define linguistics as the scientific study of a language and its structure. So we're talking about any language in the world, including the study of morphology, syntax, phonetics, and semantics. The specific branches of linguistics that include sociolinguistics, dialectology, psycholinguistics, computational linguistics, historical comparative linguistics, and applied linguistics. Obviously, we concentrate mostly right in the general or branches of linguistics that includes morphology, syntax, phonetics, and semantics. But we don't have to forget pragmatics. That's one of the modern right approaches of linguistics. Also, we can define linguistics as the scientific study of the natural human language and its structure. Remember that we mentioned that humans are the only beings in the world that are capable of having language. Animals, on the other side, have a capability for having means of communication, right? So we consider animals capable of producing systems of communication, but turning into something as a language, right, is going to be very difficult for them. We are far, right, from the development of the language. That's why humans are the ones, right, that are exclusive in the uses of a language. That's why linguistics concentrates 100% only in the natural human language. And we don't say that it includes language from other beings in the world. The discipline includes the study of the syntax, not to be confused with grammar, is totally different, semantics, and phonology and phonetics. Here, right, we are forgetting to include pragmatics in this definition, but also is one of the important branches that we have to include in linguistics. Specific branches of linguistics include neurolinguistics, social linguistics, dialectology, psycholinguistics, computational linguistics, and others that we mentioned right before. Let's go right quickly to say something about linguistics as a science. Last time we said in one of our previous classes that linguistics has to do with two things. First of all, is linguistics descriptive or prescriptive? I tell you, prescriptivism is under the premise that we have to find a correct way of using the language. But this is something that has to do with grammar. So prescriptivism is not the main purpose of linguistics, but descriptivism. We in linguistics, what we do is describe how the language worked independently of if it is correct or is incorrect. We reach to a to a moment, right, that the language is being described and people can understand themselves, right, by using the language. So linguistics try to understand what is the point in which people can still, right, use the language and they are able to communicate using it. So that's why linguistics is descriptive and it's not, right, prescriptive. The branches of linguistics, the six, right, most important branches of linguistics are this one. So we're going to describe quickly, right, what is the function of each of them. For example, if we start with semantics, semantics deals with the meaning of words, right? Words in the language, right, can have different meanings because remember that words are arbitrary. We give meaning to them because we use them to represent ideas and concepts that we have in our minds. So when we deal with semantics, we think about two things. We think in connotation and denotation, right? Denotation is the literal meaning that we give to those words. For example, when you think about a bird, a dove, for example, a dove is a bird, an animal that can fly. But also, right, in connotation, a dove can represent faith, can represent peace, can represent love in some right cultures. So that is the connotation of the word dove. So trying to understand the meanings of the words is what semantics right do. Then syntax. Syntax deals with the order, right, words have within a language. Languages, all of the languages have a specific order that we use in the words, right? For example, the position of the subject, the verb, and the objects, the preposition, the determiners, the phrases, right, for time, for place. So all of that, right, is what syntax starts to study. It's different to grammar because in grammar we deals with using the tenses like simple past, simple present, future simple. But syntax, no, right? Syntax is independent of the grammatical system because in syntax, what we deal is with the position. What is going to be the position of the auxiliary, right, in any given right tense? So syntax start to understand that. Morphology studies, right, the formation of the words. Words, right, in the same way as we explain semantics, have meaning, but sometimes, right, we give meaning to the parts of the word. So words can be separated into units, and these units can have different meanings. For example, if we use a prefix, we can change the meaning of a word into a negative word. For example, if we say happy, but later I add the prefix un and I say unhappy, I transform, right, the word in positive form to a to a negative meaning just by adding the prefix on. So morphology tries to understand why adding on, right? What is the meaning of adding on in different words? So we try to understand the meaning of the parts that forms the words. Then phonetics. In phonetics, we try to understand what is the classification of the sounds that are produced in the language. Sounds, particularly right, the phonemes, have characteristics, and these characteristics are important to take into account when you use the sound in a language. So it's important to deal with the manner of articulation, the place of articulation, and the voicing. So in phonetics, we try to understand that, right? And in that way, we classify the sounds that are used in the language. Phonology deals with the rules that govern, right, the sounds within a language. For example, adding the t sound at the end of words when we use the simple past, or adding the ng sound, right, for the ing, right, playing or working when we use the continuous form, or for example, joining sounds that we use together in order to make the language more fluent, like when we say instead of saying what are you going to do, you say what you're going to do. So phonology tried to understand those rules that we apply in the use of the language. And the least but not the less is pragmatics. Pragmatics deals with the meaning of language in certain contexts. When we use words, right, sometimes, right, we use them, right, but they have a specific purpose. So we can separate that purpose from right the context we're saying the words. For example, it's not the same if you say so long in a moment when you are, for example, saying goodbye to someone. If you say to someone so long and you are saying goodbye to someone, the person understands that you mean a farewell. But if you use so long for referring to a distance or the length of something, right, the person is going to understand something totally different. For example, if you ask about where you live, and the person say, I live 10 kilometers from here. So you say, oh, so long, so very far. So that's the situation where you use so long with a different meaning. So pragmatics try to understand the meaning of words in different contexts. So speech in context. And that's what we do basically with the branches of linguistics if you try to understand it, right? So, now let's talk about the history of the English language. As a summary of what is important to know about the history of the English language, we had to deal with this very complete timeline, right? Where we see what was happening in the British Islands. The British Islands, that is considered the home, right, of the English language, in reality was a place that was not inhabited by the original English speakers. But first, before right, the English speakers arrived to the British Islands, this place was inhabited by different tribes of people, right, called Celts. The Celts, right, had great influence in the English language, right? For example, some remnants that we still have in English that is from the Celtic influence is, for example, the ing form in the continuous tense, the use of auxiliary at the beginning, right, of certain forms, right, to form questions or to form negatives, the loss of the case and the gender, right, because we don't have that in English, and also some name of places. All of that is influenced, right, from the Celtic, right, languages that remain for around 1,000 years before the current era in the British Islands. But by the time of 200 before the current era, everything started to change because these people started to be overcome by the Romans. By the year 43, right, of the current era to the 410 of the current era, the Celtic tribes, also known as the Britons, were overtaken by the Romans, and these people right started to influence right their languages with Latin. Right, this process right of conquest took a very long time. Right, the occupation right of the Roman Empire right took around other 200 years, and by the year 400, the late 400, everything started to change. What happened in this period of time? Well, the Romans right had trouble with defending their empire, and because of that, they had to call all of the people they had in different places around the world in order to defend the capital, Rome. So the Romans that were in the British Islands by that time had to return right to the capital, and this left the Britons with no protection right from other Celtic tribes that still lived in the British Island by that time. We are talking about the Irish, the Scots, and the Pigs. So the Britons were in despair, and they didn't find any better solution than trying to contact right with people right that work as mercenaries. And these mercenaries that they tried to hire were some Anglo-Saxon tribes that lived in a place called Scandinavia, right? And this Scandinavia is located where Germany is right now. What happened with these people, the Anglo, the Saxon, the Jutes? They interpreted the plea right of help from the Britons as an opportunity for taking over the lands. It's very likely that the Anglo, the Jutes, and the Saxons were in need of better lands, right, for living because they lived in a place that was very susceptible to floods and that was not a land that was suitable for sowing and for having right cattle and animals. So that's why when they saw that the British Islands were a better place to live, and because they took right the plea of help of the Britons as a message that these people was easy to conquer, so they went there and they attacked the Britons and they make them flee right to the mountains and they took over most of the land that these people have. All of this happened during the period of time of between the late 400s to the 500s. So the people, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, that were the tribes that arrived here, they started to develop right a language that was called Old English. These tribes that at the beginning were three different right, tribes, they became one homogeneous culture called the Anglo-Saxon culture. And they right were the original speakers of the English language. With the beginning of this period, right, the influence they received from the Britons was great because later, right, with the Augustine missionaries that arrived in 497, the Anglo Saxons that were pagans and that had a lot of myths and gods became Christians, and they right started to mix their culture with the Britons, with the Latin, English. Right, that's the reason why English has a lot of words of Latin origin because all of them were adopted from religion. Right, because that was the language of the Christian right religion in that time. So this influence was very easy to see in many clerical words that were added into the English language. Then, for a very long period of time, we're talking about other 200 years, peace was well, we cannot say that there was exactly peace among right the different the Anglo-Saxons and the other tribes in the British Islands, but we could say that they consolidated very well right their kingdom right for more than 200 years. Later, right by the end or the beginning of the 800s, the Viking invasions started. These Vikings were very skillful warriors and they settled in certain parts, specifically in the northern part of what is England now. They brought with them their own language, the Old Norse, that also had a great influence in the English language, adding some of the most common words that we used right now. For example, sky, skin, um also the days of the week, right? All of those, right, were inheritance from the Old Norse. So these people spent a very long time, right, living along with the Anglo Saxons until Alfred the Great conquered, right, the whole land that was England and mixed, right, all of the tribes that were living in what was England in that time in one right only English kingdom. Later, right, some of the descendants of Alfred right had trouble because one of them right couldn't have an heir, and the problem with this was that the Normans took an advantage. They were led by William the Conqueror, that he failed, that he was the original heir to the throne because he had a family connection with Alfred the Great. And because of this, right, he believed that he had the right to become right the king of England, and he went and attacked right and defeated the king that was in that time. His name was Harold. Harold was son-in-law of the king that died with no child, and because of that, right, this William the Conqueror took the opportunity of taking over the land in the infamous Battle of Hastings. For a very long period of time, we're talking about more than 800 years. The Anglo Saxons, right, had more or less all of the control, right, of this land. They were the ruling right class of the English right, land. And because of that, the languages they spoke, the old French mixing with the old English, created what we call in that time the Middle English. It's a mixing of more than seven, right, thousand words that are still used in the English language that are from French origin. Also, remember that this old French was not exactly the French that is spoken in France right now. We're talking a version that is very old, right? A version that only share vocabulary but no the same grammar or the same syntax or morphology that we use in the French language nowadays, in the modern French. So for a very long period of time, these people was there, right, being the ruling class until right the connections right between the people who lived in the British Islands and the people who lived in the continent in France was broken because the French kingdom started to take over right the English land in the continent, and they right took over Normandy back. And because of this, right, England and France started to have a terrible relationship. It was so great this breaking that right from that moment and on, people started to use English 100% again. They broke all of the bonds that they have with the French people, and they became right again English speakers. The influence of the old French in the language was never disappeared, but the language, right, the official language of the ruling class became English again. Then the Renaissance was a period of great right development of different things that consolidated right what we know the English as it is now. For example, first of all, the appearance of the printing press and the spreading of literature. With the spreading of literature, right, the standardization of the language became easier, and because of that, right, people started to use right forms that were considered as a standard, right, in written form, in pronunciation, in grammar, in morphology, in syntax, and that's how right the English language was evolving from a period right where we consider it as early modern English into the modern English that we know now. All of that because right the printing press brought literature to the English culture, and also right because there was a process called the Great Vowel Shift, and this the Great Vowel Shift that occurred during this time consolidated the pronunciation of the words in the way we have them now. Yes, all of those crazy vowel combinations that English has right now are from this time, right? They consolidated in the process of called as the Great Vowel Shift. And later, right, during the 17th century and on, we are talking about the 17,000s, the empire, right, imports started to add, right, to being added into the English language because, right, the English empire had land in many places, right, around the world. So because of this, the elements that were imported right from those places that they control started right to add a lot of vocabulary, specifically name of things into the English language. And this is basically right, a summary of the history of the English language. We started with the old English that was spoken right during more or less from the year 500 to the year 1100. This was the language spoken by the Anglo-Saxons, remember, and that was mixed with the Celtic languages and also the Old Norse. During the time, right, these people acquired a religion and they became Christian. Also started to appear the literature, right, and we have the oldest elements of the literature of the English language, for example, Canon Inn and Beowulf, the Epic of Beowulf. Also, right after the Norman conquest that occurred between the year, right, 1100 and the year, right, 1500. The Middle English, right, had the Norman Conquest, right, the mixing between the French, the Old French, and the English language was what created the Middle English. During this time, right, the Chaucer Canterbury Tales were written, the best representative of the literature of that time. But remember, all of this literature was literature that was exclusive for rulers, for scholars, and for the aristocracy, right? It was not something that everybody would read or would have access, right, to them. And later, right, we're reaching, right, the moment when the printing press appeared and everybody started to read, to enjoy reading, to enjoy literature. And was the flourish time of Shakespeare with all of his amazing tragedies like Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, Othello, and etc. Right. So all of this period, right, of the development of the literature, the modern literature, the literature for the common people, the printing press, and the Bible chief was the one that led, right, the Middle English transforms into early modern English and then consolidate by the year, right, 1800 and on into what we know the late modern English or the modern English, the English that we speak now. Well, guys, this is a summary that I have for you about the development of the English language. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you use it for reviewing right before you take the examination right for this week. Thank you very much for paying attention and have a nice week.